rain battered the corrugated roof of the community hall, water gathering in silver puddles along the uneven stone floor. From a distance, Mexico City blurred at the edges, distant streetlights flickering in an uncertain yellow haze. But inside, all I felt was heat. Rows of bodies pressed together, cheap plastic chairs scraping as people shifted, eyes darting up and down my figure. The air thickened with something more than humidity. Accusation, disappointment, maybe fear. My mother sat in the third row, hands nested quietly in her lap, watching not me, but the ground at her feet. The old priest, Father Salazar, looked over the worn rim of his glasses. He always wore his disappointment like a heavy robe. I could see the outline of his knuckles, white and resolute, clutching the threadbare microphone. He didn't have to speak. The room had already swallowed his words, spitting them out among the crowd. Es ridículo, someone hissed behind me. She thinks she's better than us, another voice offered, sharp as a blade. I locked my gaze on the ochre crucifix above. Even Christ looked tired tonight. I was 22. I stood in front of the city, in front of people I'd grown up with, before the whole congregation that had watched me bruise my knees in these pews, eat sweet bread after Mass, sing with uncertain voice at Christmas. There was no comfort now, only the scraping sound of expectations. Shaved away and tossed to the ground, Father Salazar gestured for silence, his voice old yet sharp as mezcal. Maria wishes to speak to us tonight. She wants— He stumbled for the right word. I heard forgiveness perched on the edge of his tongue, but he bit it back. She wants to explain. Explain, as if a dream could ever be made small enough to fit their rules. I felt grief stretch thin in my ribcage, pressing until I was hollow and clear. I searched the faces. Cousins, aunts, school friends, neighbors. My older brother peering with narrowed, skeptical eyes. I couldn't see my father. He always kept himself just out of reach. But I felt the weight of his absence. I spoke. I want to be a writer. The syllables landed hard, provoking a low, incredulous laugh from the back. Maybe it was Lena, my childhood friend turned careful rival. I pressed on. I want to write novels. I want to tell stories about us, about this place, about the world the way I see it. I've saved my money, and I'll leave soon for the city center. The silence that followed seemed to split the room in two. No one moved. I smelled burning wax from a handful of votive candles, the musty wool of wet coats, and beneath it, the sharp tang of disapproval. Aunt Rosa spoke first. ¿Y para qué? For what? Stories don't feed you. You can't live on words, Maria. You're not a gringa with her parents' money. My cousin Tomas snorted. We need teachers, nurses, real work. What will you bring? Another name in a pile of useless people in the Zocalo? Who will read these stories? The words bit deep. I wanted to shout, to tell them about the manuscripts I'd written in secret, about the prize I'd almost won in university, the long nights when my fingers cramped around a pen until my hand tingled. But my tongue stayed heavy and useless. Instead, my mother spoke, low and measured. Let her try, at least. Father Salazar shook his head. You shame your family for a fantasy. Your father builds walls with his hands. Your mother cleans houses. What does a writer do? Put words in the air and wait for food to fall from the sky? Laughter now, brittle and unkind. I couldn't look at my mother. I saw her silent, the delicate tremor of her chin, the way she'd sat in the kitchen reading my stories, lips pressed thin with worry. The rain quickened. I felt undone, stripped down to the white of my bones, grief and clarity mingling in the pit of my stomach. In that moment I knew two things, that I would go anyway, and that there would be no applause, no warm send-off, no blessing for the road. They would remember this as the day I shamed them. Afterward, I walked home alone in the rain. My father waited at the kitchen table, elbows on the formica, his face turned away from me. My mother stood by the stove, ladling soup into cracked bowls. She watched me carefully, love and fear tangled in her eyes. Siempre vas a ser mi hija, she whispered, pressing a damp towel into my hand. Always my daughter. I left at dawn the next day, luggage heavy with notebooks, clothes folded thin as hope. My father didn't come outside to say goodbye. Mexico City opened its arms in promise and threat. The city always smells like smoke and diesel. 100 street kitchens sizzling with onions, chiles. Pork. I moved into a tiny room above a dulceria in La Merced, where the walls sweated in the afternoons and the bed squeaked with the smallest movement. My window looked out over tangled wires and faded paint, a city of survivors and dreamers and ghosts. I found work in an internet cafe, printing homework for children and resumes for tired fathers. I typed until my fingers ached. I wrote stories at night. The soft blue glow of my battered laptop, the only companion. I ate pan dulce with coffee, skipping meals sometimes to save money. I learned there were many like me, girls from small towns, sons who were supposed to be bricklayers but drew comic books, women who danced in the subways for loose change, manuscripts piled on the desktop, some stories about my neighborhood, others just echoes of desperation. I mailed them to magazines and publishers, holding my breath as I pressed the send button in narrow phone booths. The answers, when they came, were brutal. Not for us. Lacks commercial appeal. Nobody wants to read about mercados and barrios, Maria. Money evaporated. I called home less and less. Sometimes I thought of Lena's voice, cold and sharp. Who will read these stories? And I would write anyway, the words coming slow and jagged, filled with old anger. One winter, I met Javier at a bookstall in Coyoacán. He was a poet with wild black hair and a mouth made for laughter. We argued about Neruda, drank beer for hours beneath chipped green umbrellas, watched pigeons struck between our feet. He read my stories and said, "You don't need permission, only hunger, and you're starving." It should have made me feel stronger. But instead, one night, I broke apart. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm nothing. Javier just smiled that crooked sneer. If you were nothing, you wouldn't hurt so much. I found strength in the ordinary, the smell of tortillas baking downstairs, the slap and sting of cold water in the mornings, the old women sweeping dust from their doorways. I wrote a novel in fits and starts, about a girl who leaves her barrio, about longing and hunger, about the taste of home carried in small rituals. I printed 3 copies at my job when the manager was out, binding the pages with scavenged twine. And then a miracle, ugly as it was improbable. A small publishing house, unknown, barely afloat, replied to my submission. The letter was brief, formal, unremarkable. "We would like to publish your manuscript." I thought it was a joke. I reread the email 7 times, then called my mother, voice thick with disbelief. "Me van a publicar," I said, and she wept softly, so that I had to hang up before her sorrow reached me. The months that followed were lean. My advance was enough to buy a used laptop and patch a few holes in my jacket. The publisher's office was a rented room with 2 chairs and a battered photocopier. But there was something sacred about it, the smell of ink and dust, the soft crinkle of marked-up galleys. My editor, Sophia, was as fierce as she was tired. "Make it true," she demanded. "If you lie, even a little, we'll know." I wrote and revised until I dreamed in fragments, conversations stitched together with longing. On publication day, there was no party. The book appeared in 4 bookstores, stacked next to recipe books and discount thrillers. I visited one shop in Roma Norte, heart stumbling, and waited for someone to pick it up. No one did. But a month later, a woman recognized me in the coffee shop where I wrote. She pressed the book to her chest and said, "Este es mi barrio. Gracias." That night, I cried for the first time in years, relief and loneliness in equal measure. The novel didn't change the world, nor did it make me rich. But it began slowly, and then all at once, to find its readers. Newspapers wrote short reviews, calling the book honest, raw, a testament of place. My publisher offered a second contract. I wrote another novel, then essays, told the truth over and over until even I began to believe in it. Years passed. I moved to a better apartment with a window facing a real street and a cactus on the sill. My stories appeared in magazines. I traveled to give talks in far cities, though I still felt like an intruder. And then, out of nowhere, the call came. The community in my old neighborhood was organizing its annual fiesta. They wanted successful children to visit, to show what was possible. I hesitated. Success felt like a borrowed coat, ill-fitting, a little too bright. But my mother called, voice warm and insistent. "Then, Maria, it's time." I returned by bus at dusk, the city fading behind me, fields of trash and wildflowers rising and falling on either side of the highway. The streets were bitter with memory. I saw the hall, a little repainted, the rust a cleaner orange. Banners flapped in the wind. Bienvenidos, painted in careful flourishes. Inside, everything was familiar and strange. The same cheap chairs, polished by years of use. The same faces, older now, lined and careful. Even Lena was there, quietly composed, her eyes still quick. At first no one recognized me.